Hey, the name is Daniel, also known as Mulka2, and today I'll be talking about the original Mass Effect, which was released on the Xbox 360 and later ported to PS3 and PC. Since I'm a completionist, I've spent the last eternity playing this thing. I started at the very beginning of 2017 and I literally only just finished. I'm not the kind of person who should be playing these long-form RPGs, as I tend to obsess over the most minute shit. Mass Effect, thankfully, is a sort of happy medium between what you might expect from an RPG and what you might see in your typical action-oriented third-person shooter. This changes as the trilogy goes on, but that's a topic for another day. For now, let's talk about the game that started it all, mere days before Mass Effect Andromeda hits current-gen platforms. So when talking Mass Effect, the first word that comes to my mind is atmosphere. You have to understand that Mass Effect is a space opera through and through, and that it aims to be as epic as possible at almost every turn. Since this isn't your typical shooter, this usually doesn't come in the form of action set pieces on their own. Rather, it comes in the form of equal parts substance and scale. Sure, there are big epic moments in this game, and there are some dramatic boss fights here and there, but the game really shines when it presents itself as larger than life. From the very first moments of this game, we know that there is a lot to this universe. We see alien races, we see crazy technology, we see advanced spacecraft, and we have absolutely no time to allow any of it to sink in before we're dropped into our first main mission. What's cool, however, is that Shepard, the main character of the game, is also fairly new to some of the responsibilities of this world as well. He, or she in my case, is appointed as the first human Spectre of the Space Citadel Council fairly early on in the game, and so Shepard themselves is fairly new in their position. We learn along with them, and at the pace that we choose, about some of the details of this franchise. Mass Effect does this through a codex entry system. There are seemingly hundreds of these little codex entries that pop up throughout your adventures. Although they are completely optional, their very presence makes the places you visit seem so much more detailed. Pretty soon you forget that the Citadel is really just a collection of tightly knit environments connected by elevators. You imagine for yourself what might be beyond the boundaries of the map, and I think that's awesome. I mean, for all I know, half of these codex entries could be pure garbage, as I've never read most of them. But what's great is that none of that is important. Sure, if you want the minute details, have at them, but they don't make or break the game to any capacity. I think it's great when a game can make your imagination run wild, with or without the necessary details. What I'm trying to say here is Mass Effect is easily digestible at a base level environmentally and narratively, and yet is complex to those seeking to go the extra mile. If a game can do both, then it's probably pretty damn good. Going back to atmosphere, Mass Effect is big, bold, and bright. Everything in this world and everyone appears so sterile and perfect. This is a far cry from the likes of Star Wars, which is far more, how do I put it, grubby. It's kind of hard to explain, but the places we go to in Mass Effect, while certainly in disarray, are fairly calm and organised for the most part. The Citadel itself, for instance, is idyllic, almost to a fault. There is a kind of uneasiness to everything in the game, and personally I feel it works to its favour. By presenting such a flawless world to us, the developers manage to subvert our expectations when things actually do go awry. So what of this universe then? What's it like? So Mass Effect takes place, as far as I can tell, exclusively within our own Milky Way, or at least a part of it. Again, very broadly, the many races of Mass Effect are those that are local to this galaxy, and humans are but one of about 10 or so races that we're able to interact with. The main gist of Mass Effect is, actually, the politics of managing so many different species and so many different colonies in a universe that is slowly but steadily falling under disarray. At this early stage, we don't yet see or interact with the main bad guys of the franchise, the Reapers. Rather, Shepard and friends are talking more about threats, and so your goal in the game becomes convincing the powerful players of the Citadel to take heed to your warnings. It's an interesting place to be as a player. What's great, this being part of a trilogy, is that we're given the opportunity to see what this universe is like before it all comes crumbling down in the later entries. The threat is always looming in the distance, and you are left to piece it all together. As a Spectre, you're given almost unlimited access to basically everything, and so you can pursue this mystery at your own pace and as you see fit. You are told that you can tackle your objectives in whatever order you please. You're given permission to ignore the red tape of intergalactic politics, and as a player that's rather exhilarating and liberating. So you can go almost wherever you want, at whatever pace you'd like, on your own custom Alliance spaceship, the Normandy, the base of all your operations. Exploring the Normandy, and the Citadel for that matter, are my favourite things to do in this game. These exploration portions with no conflict are great. You can look around, interact with things, and talk to many people. There are side quests or assignments to find. There are interesting conversations to have. There is information to learn. And once again, most of this is completely optional. The many inhabitants of the Citadel in particular are very interesting. They all have a reason for being somewhere or for seeing someone, and most of the time it's your job to help. That first trip to the Citadel, when you'll probably look around every corner, is really awesome. You end up with this huge list of chores, and while some may find that annoying, I find it really exciting. It made me all the more eager to jump back into the galaxy map when ready. That galaxy map is at the heart of this game, and of the franchise by extension. It's an amazing way to, essentially, just select whatever mission you'd like to tackle. You can zoom all the way out to view the entire Milky Way, and from there you can zoom into the individual clusters. You ping yourself across the various points of interest and select wherever you'd like to go. Again, just like before, many of this is empty space, but some planets have nothing on them, but they are all still given a description. The amount of detail and effort that has gone into naming and chronicling all the goings-ons of every planet, whether they're colonized, the weather they experience, and even how long each day is honestly kind of mind-boggling. It's a neat touch, and I wish more games went ahead and did this. Some planets can actually be interacted with, however. Sometimes this will just provide you with resources and credits. Other times you can actually land on these planets and explore them with the M35 Mako, which brings us onto the side quests. There are tons of side quests in Mass Effect, and you'll probably want to do at least a few of them. They offer a ton of rewards, and some even lead directly into the main narrative. I'll get into this a little later, but it's really neat when something you do in a side quest, or the way in which you complete an objective, has a noticeable effect on the main narrative of the game. Granted, none of this will blow you away, but I can't help but get a little giddy when I notice a news report or an email has changed because of something minute I might have done in a completely optional side objective. The side quests in Mass Effect, for the most part, are quite substantial. They have you going all over the place, usually to rescue somebody or to apprehend a suspect. Usually this leads you to a research base, or a cave, or a derelict space station. If you do decide to complete everything, like I did, then this will probably grow a little stale with time. There are a lot of bases to explore and a lot of caves to pilfer, and unfortunately the layout of these environments never ever changes. Once you've done one, you've done them all, at least from a gameplay standpoint. What makes them more interesting are the interactions you can have with some of the NPCs on these missions. Usually they are members of a cult or maybe terrorists or something. Getting to talk with these suspects and getting the opportunity to talk them down with persuasive dialogue choices is really interesting. These side missions are where some of the most exciting decisions are able to be made, as they aren't tied to what we expect from the main narrative. You get to play as a space cop, essentially, and personally I find that to be really fun. But again, it isn't for everybody, and these missions do repeat themselves quite a bit. Part of that repetition comes from the planet exploration itself. Like I mentioned, you can explore the surface of about a dozen planets. Each planet's surface is, at least, aesthetically different, and some even have environmental factors that prevent you from staying outside of your craft for too long. That being said, almost every single one of these planets is mountainous, rocky, and very, very annoying to navigate across. The Mako has boosters and can climb very steep hills, but even still I found myself getting increasingly annoyed by how hard it was to cross some areas. You are sent all over these planets to the most annoying places to pick up the most useless, insignificant shit. That isn't fun to me, especially since not all of the planet's points of interest are immediately identified to you on your map, which you frustratingly have to open from the menu every single time. These interactable objects always look the same, and their placement on the planet seems rather arbitrary. Sometimes there's just a building in the middle of nowhere, and when everything else in this game is so well thought out, I can't help but ask myself, why is this research base here, and why is it so empty? That may be a nitpick, but it started to annoy me a lot. I also hate Mako conflict, and I did give it a fair shake. I just find myself always getting hit no matter what I do, and I died so many times, especially on the harder difficulties. You have to take down shielded enemies and turrets a whole lot, and I kept finding myself missing my shots, even though my reticle was right on them. That isn't entirely the game's fault, but I can't ignore just how annoying and boring it all is. Compared to on-foot conflict, vehicle conflict is an absolute drag. These vehicle sections do reappear in the main story missions, but to a much smaller degree, and usually to much greater effect. In fact, the main story missions in general are fairly well designed. There are really only about 6, but these missions are substantial and take you all over the place. There are, granted, a few duds amongst the package here. The Liara mission on Therum is a real drag, and you spend way too long on Novaria. But then there's Feros, which is legitimately one of the coolest missions I've played in a video game in recent years. There's a ton of mystery and intrigue, and it's really just kind of neat. I won't spoil all the details here, but it plays out really well, and I really enjoy the conclusion. Overall, the main story of Mass Effect is fine, but it isn't what pulls me forward. It's serviceable, but I do feel that the games get better as they go along, at least from this perspective. In Mass Effect 1, I care less about the overall goal of the narrative and more about the individual interactions I have within it. Which brings us to the conversation wheel and the choice-making mechanics that the series is really known for. So while combat and exploration are key pillars of Mass Effect, dialogue and conversations are just as important. You talk a lot of politics in this game, and so a conversation wheel system like this was an absolute necessity. It also lends itself nicely to a controller. When you enter a conversation with anyone, a bunch of sentences appear around a circle, which you navigate with the thumbstick. Those options on the right tend to progress any conversation further, whereas those on the left tend to offer more optional detail and prolong a conversation. Those options closer to the top tend to be more friendly and respectful, whereas those towards the bottom are more aggressive. Whenever there are breaks in the dialogue, you get to choose what Shepard says next, and so you direct the conversation. It's a neat system with a surprising amount of depth, and I'm glad to see that it has been adopted by many other games, and remains a staple of Mass Effect to this very day. It isn't a flawless system, mind you, since the options available to you don't always translate exactly how you would think into Shepard's actual words. Also, some options give the appearance of choice, don't appear to actually offer it in some cases. However, for the most part, you understand what kind of choices you're making, and I'm glad that the game gives you ample time to make any decisions. Sometimes options will be unavailable to you unless you have the set amounts of charm or intimidation in your skill tree, which I'll get to in a second. These skills are a part of a larger morality metagame known as the Paragon and Renegade systems. As you make decisions or take particular actions, you gain points towards each. Those actions that are more liberal, or those that abide more to structure and law, are Paragon-oriented. Those actions that are more destructive and put more lives in danger are Renegade choices. Both have pros and cons and both offer particular bonuses, and yes, both are associated with achievements and trophies, so I played through the game twice, making exclusively choices for each. But you'll benefit from the system most if that isn't what you do, as the system is designed so you make both Renegade and Paragon choices at the same time. You see, most games with these kind of morality systems make the fatal flaw of only tracking one system at a time. What I mean by that is that one bad decision is usually cancelled out by 2 good decisions in your average RPG. In Mass Effect, your actions have consequences and you can't undo what has already happened. Any choice, even if it isn't necessarily bad, remains on your record forever. I feel this is more realistic and offers the player a greater degree of choice. When a player knows that only one system is being tracked at a time, they'll tend to only make one sort of decision throughout their entire playthrough. That's just logical. However, when 2 different systems are at play, players feel more willing to experiment, and that can only be a good thing. And on that note, you do make some significant choices in this game. Who lives and who dies? Who do you sacrifice for the greater good? Who should be appointed as ambassador to the Citadel Council? Should you let the hostages live and risk a madman going free, or should you sacrifice innocent lives for the interests of society at large? You do have to make some tough decisions, and I found myself deliberating over them quite a lot. They challenge you morally, and that's a powerful quality in any game. And yes, by perusing the Mass Effect wiki and through my own personal experience, I found that while some decisions don't make much of an impact, there are a few that have ramifications in even the later Mass Effect titles if you choose to carry over your save. For instance, at one stage in this game, you do have to choose who to sacrifice of 2 of your squad mates, as I'm sure you've seen or heard. But what's so cool is that the team member you choose to sacrifice will obviously not appear in any later Mass Effect titles if you choose to carry over your save, and that means that your own playthrough can be drastically different from someone else's. And I'm talking very, very different. It's kind of crazy to think about. Another cool example is how, when you first visit the Citadel, you are introduced to some of your squad mates, most notably Garrus and Rex. You can outright decline one of these guys from entering your team, and boom, that's it. They just outright disappear from the rest of your game, which may seem novel to some, but is absolutely crazy to me. The choice-making mechanics in Mass Effect are easily, in my opinion, the real draw of this franchise. Speaking of sidekicks, there are 6 of them in total. Kaidan, Tali, Liara, Garrus, Ashley, and Rex. Some of these characters have become real fan favourites, and for good reason. Tali and Liara stick with you throughout the trilogy, and Garrus is a really awesome character. Kaidan, Ashley, and Rex aren't my favourites, but I can see why some people like them. And again, what's really neat is the ways in which you interact with some of your squad mates may make an important impact on the events of the later games. One plotline in particular from Mass Effect 3 is hinged on the ways in which you interact with Rex all the way back in Mass Effect 1. The trust that your psychics have in you as the protagonist will affect how they perceive you as a leader, and this is important as the trilogy goes on. Your squad mates are all unique. They each have different combat styles, use different kinds of weapons and armor, and are effective at certain things. Moreover, some of these characters have particularly interesting backgrounds, and your choice to bring them along on certain missions may change certain conversations and outcomes. You can choose 2 of these sidekicks to go along with you at any one time, and can switch them by returning to the Normandy. You can also customize your sidekicks to your heart's content, change their weapons and their attachments, upgrade their armor, and update their skill trees. As for the option to romance your companions, which is a staple for any RPG, Mass Effect is actually rather tame, especially in comparison to the later entries. I have played the other games to at least some capacity, and I've seen tons of gameplay, and I know that romance is a huge part of the sequels. There are tons of romance options in Mass Effect 2 and 3, and tons of opportunities to pursue them. In Mass Effect 1, the moments in which you can romance your companions is fairly delineated. Basically, you get an opportunity to romance your choice after each main mission, but that's it, and only once. You don't go on dates, and you rarely get a chance to sit down and chat, and even then there are only 3 romance options here. Male Shep can romance Ashley, and female Shep can romance Kaidan. Both have the option to romance Liara, but that's really it. No outlandish alien-on-alien sex just yet. But I digress. Mass Effect is, at its heart, an RPG, and so there are obviously skills and abilities to customize. You have a skill tree, and so do each of your squad members. You basically get a point for each level you reach, and you cannot fill every branch as far as I'm aware. You do have to choose carefully, but I can't say that every decision you make in the skill tree is important. It's all fairly linear, and taking one option never removes another. You can be a jack of all trades, assuming you have the time and patience. Also, most abilities are unlocked fairly early on, so there's really no reason to fret. Some of the skills you can unlock are more passive and general. They may give you more health or increase your weapon effectiveness, for example. But a few of them are more interesting, like hacking abilities or the aforementioned charm or intimidation traits. These are the most useful skills to adopt and should be your first choice in any playthrough as far as I'm concerned. Overall, it's a solid system, and I'll reserve judgment as to whether or not the system gets any better in the sequels until after I've fully played them all. Gear and weapons can also be customized. There's actually a considerable amount of depth here, but it never goes too far. There's no weapon crafting and there's no weapon degradation. I'm thankful for this, as that shit is just annoying. Here, the complexity is suitable. You choose a weapon and get to make the choice of what you should prioritize. Some guns are just objectively better than others, but different weapon manufacturers offer different weapon models that are essentially variants of one another. You can't completely screw yourself over by ignoring or selling any particular weapon, but there are still important choices to be made. You may also add weapon or ammo attachments that change the effectiveness of any gun. I like that most of these attachments have both considerable pros and cons that accurately reflect the nature of the attachment. Adding a high caliber barrel to your assault rifle, for instance, will allow for larger, more damaging rounds to be fired, but the rate of fire itself will be slowed, and the weapon will overheat much quicker. This might make the attachment only suitable for certain models or variants, and I find that to be particularly interesting. These attachments have a real, considerable impact on gameplay, since you're in active control of Shepard at all times. Although your actual ability to fight and take cover is most important, these little additions are still noticeable and feel like a worthy addition as a whole. Speaking of, combat itself is probably where most players found their biggest problems with the game. Combat has objectively improved as the series has gone on, and you'll see why. And granted, Mass Effect launched all the way back in 2007 at the advent of third-person shooters. Things were still being figured out back then, and keeping that in mind, Mass Effect 1 isn't half bad. But I'm viewing this as I see it in 2017, and I see a game that hasn't aged particularly well on this particular front. The cover system is pretty broken. You can't effectively dash from one place to another. Allocating commands to your team is an absolute pain, and ability usage is finicky at best. It feels very robotic, and that's a problem when enemy fire can absolutely destroy you on harder difficulties. Targeting feels off, guns feel floaty, and melee combat, while certainly a last resort, is essentially broken. Not to mention, the frame rate on Xbox 360 makes this unplayable at times, but I'm at least willing to look past that. I may be a little too harsh here, but combat wasn't ever really fun for me. It was always a drag, and I always couldn't wait for it to be over. That being said, I feel as if the heat management mechanic of Mass Effect 1 is leagues better than the ammo-based systems of Mass Effect 2 and 3, and I honestly prefer it, but more on that another time. So combat hasn't aged particularly well. Neither have the load times, the quality of the animations, or the quality of the sound. That being said, I still look at Mass Effect and think of it as a beautiful game. It's fairly well designed, and the low quality of the textures don't bother me particularly. The technology at display here, while certainly dated, still holds up, and it's a testament to the game's quality that I can still play it today. Seriously, go back and play games from a decade ago and remove your nostalgia goggles. Most of them control like trash. Mass Effect isn't immune to such treatment, but it's still completely functional, and I'd still recommend giving it a go. So I may have come across as overly harsh there, but in all honesty I had trouble finding negative things to say. Mass Effect 1, as a whole, is actually really great, and I really respect what BioWare was going with here. They took a huge chance with it, and a lot of talented people with very vivid imaginations clearly put a lot of love into this product. It's easily the black sheep of the trilogy, but it is still worth a try, and if you want the full Mass Effect experience, this really should be your first stop. Finally, I want to talk about completion. There's a lot to do in this game, and the achievement list made sure that I did absolutely all of it. To get 1200 gamer score, I had to beat the game a total of 3 times. The first playthrough was on casual, and I played with Garrus and Kaidan. I made all Paragon choices here. I also chose the Soldier class as I found it to be the most effective in conflict. This playthrough got me about half of the achievements, as I also completed the 2 DLC packs. My second playthrough was on Hardcore mode, which can only be unlocked by beating the game for the first time on any other difficulty. You can carry your game over for a sort of New Game Plus mode, and so my level 49 Soldier carried through. I used Ashley and Tali here, and I made all the Renegade choices. My final playthrough was with the final difficulty level, Insane, which, of course, can only be unlocked after first beating the game on Hardcore. This playthrough almost destroyed me. Enemies are always a higher level than you, and some are immune to certain abilities and ammo types. I chose Rex and Liara, and I reached level 60, the maximum level. I did another short playthrough to unlock all of the biotic ability achievements, and then I was finally done. However, I did complete one last playthrough with my original save, making all the choices I actually wanted to make and using the squad I actually wanted to use. This will be my personal playthrough, and will be my transferred file when I choose to play Mass Effect 2. So yeah, in total, Mass Effect took me about 80 hours to 100%. I'm proud to have done it, but I now realise how insane of a requirement it actually was. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed my Mass Effect review/analysis. It's definitely the hardest video I've had to make so far on this channel, and it took a lot of effort, so I hope it turned out okay. I'll eventually have a review of Mass Effect 2, but I think I'm going to take a break from this franchise for just a little while. I'd really like to first give out my impressions of Breath of the Wild and the Switch, or maybe Horizon Zero Dawn. Only time will tell. Anyway, thanks again for watching, and have a great day.